Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Okay, guys. Battle of Hohenfriedberg, 1745. Frederick the Great's Second Silesian War, 1744 to 45, which means so we are going in the 1740s from 2022. This is what we're learning about. And Second Silesian War. Silesia is kind of I think it was the old German border, but it's about this general area. All right, guys. So that's what we're learning about right now as we continue our quest to learn about world history. This is our next stop. Let's do it. Preemptive like, original link to the video, top of the description. Let's get ready. Phones away. Take notes. There'll be a pop quiz.
On the early morning of June 4th, 1745, Prince Charles of Lorraine and his 63,000-strong Habsburg army camped between the cities of Pilgrimshain, Huntersdorf, and Thomaswaldau. He knew the Prussian army, commanded personally by Frederick the Great, was close by. He was in hostile territory, after all. Then, amidst the darkness of the night, he heard screams, muskets firing, and general sounds of battle. Moments later, an out-of-breath infantry soldier ran into the Austrian camp. He shouted, "The Prussians are here! They are attacking our Saxon allies nearby Pilgrimshain." Charles began shouting orders at his men, for before he knew it, the battle had already broken out. In June 1742, Austria and Prussia concluded the Treaty of Breslau. Subsequently, Frederick remained an outside observer to the fighting for 24 months. He didn't idle during this time. He continued restocking his In June 17...
This guy has a cool accent. Where's that accent from? Sounds really cool. All right, sorry.
Already broken out. In June 1742, Austria and Prussia concluded the Treaty of Breslau. Subsequently, Frederick remained an outside observer to the fighting for 24 months. He didn't idle during this time. He continued restocking his depleted treasury and rebuilding his army, making several military improvements. 2 months after Breslau, the British envoy reported that the king is augmenting his army every day. One of the main improvements was the retraining of Prussian hussars and the heavy cavalry, because during the First Silesian War it became painful.
Sorry guys, I always see this hat, and it's just who wears these hats? They're just pretty distinctive, and I always look at them. And okay.
One of the main improvements was the retraining of Prussian hussars and the heavy cavalry, because during the First Silesian War it became painfully obvious this Prussian cavalry performed subpar compared to the well-disciplined infantry. So already after the Battle of Mollwitz, the first battle of that war, Frederick launched a grueling training regimen, which he continued after Breslau. From now on, his hussars weren't used as heavy cavalry anymore. Instead, they performed light cavalry, scouting, and acting as flexible units. Additionally, the Prussian artillery received training to make them faster on the battlefield. Frederick's zealous improvements of his army proved necessary, despite it formerly being peacetime. By late 1742, the Habsburgs managed to expel the French from Bohemia. They also occupied Bavaria, beginning a process of incorporating the electorate into the Habsburg Empire. The new year didn't bode well either. The British expanded their financial support to the Habsburgs to actual military aid. George II personally commanded his pragmatic army, scoring a victory against the French at Dettingen. During these months, the Saxons realized they gained nothing by continuing their alliance with France and Bavaria.
I've said this about in the video I posted today about like every country England has invaded or or whatever, and how England just is so lucky to have the English Channel, to be an island and not be too big, be an easily defensible, an amazing navy, so they can pretty much pick and choose. Like, they're never really under threat of direct invasion of their homeland, not often, and so they can just kind of pick and choose like who to blockade and if they want to send soldiers or not. It's just such a privilege, you know.
Pragmatic army scoring a victory against the French at Dettingen. During these months, the Saxons realized they gained nothing by continuing their alliance with France and Bavaria. So instead, in December, they switched sides and joined the Habsburgs. This defection was not in the least caused by Frederick's unfriendly attitude towards his allies, which he often badmouthed in public for anyone to hear. Formerly, the Saxon-Austrian alliance was defensive, but everyone knew it was directed directly against Prussia. Moreover, losing Saxony as an ally posed another geopolitical problem for Prussia. Saxony's elector doubled as the King of Poland-Lithuania. He could now agree to Russian armies trekking through the Commonwealth to invade Prussia from the east. In February 1744,
What?
posed another directly against Prussia.
Skip ahead if you want to.
Offensive, but everyone knew it was directed directly against Prussia. Moreover, losing Saxony as an ally posed another geopolitical problem for Prussia. Saxony's elector doubled as the King of Poland-Lithuania. He could now agree to Russian armies trekking through the Commonwealth to invade Prussia from the east. In February 1744, Frederick learned of a secret alliance signed between Austria, Great Britain.
How much can they trust the Russians, though, to just, leave once they're done?
And Sardinia. Despite a secret alliance signed between Austria, Great Britain, and Sardinia, despite him not knowing for sure, he rightly assumed it was directed against him. Similarly to the First Silesian War, he felt cornered and decided not to wait for his enemies to strike first. In June, he signed a renewed offensive alliance with France. His goal was to conquer Bohemia, strengthen the Bavarian Holy Roman Emperor, and seize territories up to the Pardubitz for himself while he was at it. Then in August, he marched south together with 80,000 soldiers, a fully stocked war chest, and ample wagons to supply his soldiers. Most of Austria's troops were fighting the French near the Rhine. The poorly garrisoned province didn't stand a chance against the high morale Prussians. Within a week, they captured the city of Prague. 1 week later, they captured Tabor. But despite having momentum, things went wrong. In Frederick's History of My Own Times, he wrote, "No general committed more faults than I did during this campaign." News of the Prussian invasion reached Charles of Lorraine. Contrary to Frederick's expectations, Charles turned his...
It kind of makes me, believe his word a bit more, knowing that he'll rag on
during
himself.
this campaign. News of the Prussian invasion reached Charles of Lorraine. Contrary to Frederick's expectations, Charles turned his entire army around and returned to Bohemia, with, as Blanding puts it, a speed usually thought to be uncharacteristic of the Austrians. Count Baciani had already been roaming around in Bohemia, augmenting Charles's army with another...
So 100 years prior to this, wasn't the 30 years war going on? So is there still a lot of religious tension going on in the 1700s?
Baciani had already been roaming around in Bohemia, augmenting Charles's army with another 18,000 soldiers. Additionally, another 20,000 Saxons joined in late October. Suddenly, Frederick faced an army of impressive size, nearly matching his own. Not willing to face the Prussians in open battle, a prolonged campaign of recapturing minor Bohemian settlements followed. This continued until December, when Frederick abandoned Prague and prepared for his winter stay in Silesia. The minor skirmishes and constant harassment of supply lines resulted in a war of attrition Frederick's army wasn't prepared for. Letters from Austrian officers reveal up to 30,000 Prussians deserted by the end of 1744. This included officers. They hadn't even fought a real major battle yet, and Frederick's army was already crumbling. A renewed anti-Prussian alliance, the expansion of the Saxon army, and the death of Holy Roman Emperor Charles VII unnerved Frederick even more. Charles's son and heir Maximilian III Joseph opened negotiations with Maria Theresa. After a subsequent disastrous defeat for the Bavarians at Pfaffenhofen, the Peace of Füssen marked the end of hostilities between Bavaria and Austria. And things got even worse. Despite the alliance with France still standing, by spring 1745, the kingdom had withdrawn close to all their soldiers to wage war in the Low Countries. Unbeknownst to Frederick, behind his back, the great powers...
The Low Countries. So just the... Does Low Countries mean like modern day Belgium, Denmark, or Northwest Germany?
...were already discussed. Unbeknownst to Frederick, behind his back, the great powers were already discussing the partition of Prussia. They wanted to eradicate the minor player, which they deemed already destroyed. All required was a finishing blow to tip it over the edge. But regardless of his desperate position, Frederick clung on. He left Potsdam for Silesia in March, determined to rebuild his army through recruitment and amnesty for deserters. In the Austrian camp, spirits were high. The Austrians decided to march into Silesia and strike the inevitable final blow against a faltering Prussia. By May, Charles already reached villages a bit to the southwest of Breslau. Augmented by 19,000 Saxon soldiers, he continued his march north. The initial invasion through the mountain passes was straightforward without any notable resistance. However, the Austrians were unaware this was Frederick's plan. A Prussian spy in the Austrian camp informed Charles that Frederick retreated to Breslau for a last stand. But on the contrary, Frederick aimed to lure the Austrians into the Silesian plains for open battle. As soon as they entered Silesia, things changed. Charles referred to Silesia as the most difficult country he ever had to deal with. Frederick quartered his army at a small village on a 2-hour march away from Hohenfriedberg, providing significant oversight of the Silesian plains. Austrian correspondence reveals Charles expected to meet 40,000 battered Prussians at best. Instead, nearly 60,000 awaited him. On June 3rd, Frederick received intelligence of the Austrian army marching in the plains south of his position. He ordered his men to leave the campfires burning and tents pitched, deceiving the Austrian scouts. Then they embarked on a night's...
That is just classic for going back to like Hannibal, or probably Alexander the Great too, just, you know, keeping campfires lit. I mean, by this time, you must be so aware of that strategy that, I mean, how can you fall for the, campfires lit, that means army? Obviously, without getting right up to it, you won't know whether it's a fake, whether it's a ploy or not. So, okay. All right.
Burning in tents pitched, deceiving the Austrian scouts. Then they embarked on a night's march towards the Austrians. That evening, the Austrian army camped in a long line spanning from the town of Pilgrimshain to the Strichau Lake. In contrast, the Prussians could not form battle lines in the cluttered terrain south of the Strichau. So first they used a few bridges around the Strichau to cross the river. Crossing the bridges for an army this size took quite some time. The first to cross was Lieutenant General Dumoulin, tasked with seizing the elevations in front of the Strichau. His force numbered some 6 battalions of infantry and 28 hussar squadrons. Frederick commanded the entire Prussian army himself. Sources conflict.
I know there are like aren't there certain numbers that are in a squadron or a battalion? I haven't memorized those yet. I really should. It would make things much more understandable in these videos.
Frederick commanded the entire Prussian army himself. Sources conflict on whether he ordered not to take any prisoners preceding the battle. Prince Charles of Lorraine commanded the Habsburg army, with Johann Adolf II, Duke of Saxe-Weissenfels, commanding the Saxons. Prussia fielded approximately 42,000 infantry, 14,500 heavy cavalry, 2,300 light cavalry, and 192 artillery guns. Light infantry and the characteristic mitre-wearing grenadiers manned the infantry lines, whereas the cavalry consisted of cuirassiers, dragoons, and hussars.
Dragoons, I get it.
The Austrians numbered some...
I didn't understand what dragoon meant before, because it seemed like it was like a cavalry guy that just got off his horse. But it's more for like being able to like, all right, we need, you know, rows of guns or people with, you know, not muskets, whatever it was called, blunderbuss, or to like go over. All right, like during the battle to make maneuvers. So I get it now. I understand what the purpose of a dragoon is now.
40,000 and the Saxons up to 19,000 troops with 122 artillery pieces. The Austrian cavalry consisted of heavy cuirassiers and light Hungarian hussars. Its infantry consisted of the traditional light infantry and grenadiers. Among them walked regional regiments levied from other areas of the empire, such as the Croatian Pandurs. The Battle of Hohenfriedberg enjoyed a somewhat confusing start. Unbeknownst to Frederick, only the center of the Austrian army had lit their campfires. The Saxons and Austrian cavalry were roaming in the dark. Dumoulin soon discovered that some Saxons had already occupied the elevations. When he arrived, skirmishes broke out.
Dang it, I was gonna say, why don't the Saxons do that? I would have sounded so smart. I would
occupy the elevations. When he arrived, skirmishes broke out.
Believe me.
And when news reached Frederick, Dumoulin was already fighting soldiers on the hilltops. He ordered 6 24-pounder guns to move onto the hill to support Dumoulin. On the other side of the battlefield, the noise of battle alerted the Saxon and Austrian lines of the Prussian advance. In response, the Saxon and Austrian commanders began deploying parts of their army. Catching on and realizing he was losing his advantage, Dumoulin decided to bypass the hills and charge straight at the Saxon camp. However, because of the scattered
nature, this is such a mess. I love it.
The Austrian and Saxon lines, most of his cavalry found themselves engaged in skirmishes before reaching the Saxon camp. In addition, the Saxon cavalry was deployed further to the west and in front of Pilgrimshain than the Prussians anticipated.
All right, I love how like both sides were unprepared. Like sometimes, most of the history videos I watch where like they get to the point where they're showing the battle and how it plays out. You know, most of like the sides are ready and facing each other. Sometimes one side isn't ready and the other is, but rarely is it like neither side is ready and it's like, oh my god, I hear gunfire, go, and the other side says the same thing.
Prussians would be stuck in Pilgrimshain than the Prussians anticipated. The Prussians would be stuck in a pincer movement if things went wrong. Fortunately for Frederick, the Prussians maintained the upper hand against the unprepared Saxons. Before too long, Dumoulin managed to launch a charge against the main Saxon encampment. Weissenfels managed to deploy part of his cavalry and launch a counterattack against the Prussians, but to no avail. As the battle continued, parts of the Saxon infantry managed to deploy and face the Prussians, but they were outnumbered. Their position wasn't strong enough to take on the ever-advancing Prussian infantry and cavalry. Scattered, ferocious fighting continued as the Prussians captured many Saxons, including their generals. Meanwhile, in the background, the Prussian infantry under Prince Leopold Max of Anhalt-Dessau was finally wrapping up their deployment in the center of the improvised battle line. They began their advance against the Saxon and Austrian line. They did not mind the sporadic bombardment of the Austrian artillery. The Prussian right, facing whatever the Saxons could deploy, met combat first, but they soon littered the battlefield with blood and corpses as they fired their volleys. As battle continued, meanwhile, disaster struck the Prussian rear. Most of the army had crossed the bridges, but before a significant portion of the cavalry crossed, the bridge collapsed. As such, part of the cavalry was left behind the river. It was up to General von Zieten to find a crossing somewhere along the Striga River. This wasn't communicated to the cavalry in the vanguard, however.
God, imagine how stressful that would be. Just like knowing that your guy is like waiting and you got to go all the way around. I mean, someone got to keep a cool head.
The river. This wasn't communicated to the cavalry in the vanguard, however. By 7 a.m., Prussia largely defeated the Saxons. They were not able to resist the Prussian advance on nearly every angle of their front line. Those who survived fled the battlefield. The Austrians were left alone, but they had been deploying and were now ready for battle, albeit too late to help their allies. The Austrian infantry was positioned between Guntersdorf and Thomaswaldau, while the cavalry was positioned between Thomaswaldau and the Strichau River.
It's always so hard in all of these, whether it's, this channel, House of History or Kingston channel. They all do such great jobs, but I'm not saying there's a way to make it more easy to understand, but it's like this is a line that stretches between two towns, and it's difficult to just think about what that looks like,
The Prussian vanguard cavalry contingent was the first to face an Austrian charge on their left. They weren't aware of the bridge in their rear collapsing and the lack of cavalry reinforcements. A ferocious, savage battle ensued. The Prussians were put on the back foot by the numerically superior Austrians. Things did not look good until Zieten managed to find a ford and cross the river. The sudden arrival of more Prussian cavalry shocked the Austrians. Fierce combat ensued, while another cavalry contingent crossed the same ford in the background.
I almost wonder if the breaking of the bridges almost worked in the Prussian favor, in that it gave the Austrians like a bit of positivity, courage, or whatever, and then seeing them unexpectedly then come in might be even more demoralizing than if it worked out. Or maybe I'm wrong and it's never mind. You get what I mean, though, right?
These arrived just in time to charge against the Austrian cavalry reinforcements, which were charging against the Prussian vanguard. During this cavalry fight, the 1st Prussian infantry contingent advanced between Thomaswaldau and Güntersdorf. A report from the Prussian General Staff details:
"It is flags flying and drums beating. It is Austrian canister shot and musket fire. It is an awesome, inexorable body of marching Prussians who refuse to disintegrate. Then it is assault by bayonet. The enemy falls back. The villages are seized. The king lowers his spyglass. The battle is won," he states.
It is flags flying and drums
Dang it, he was going to say it. Sorry.
beating. It is Austrian canister shot and musket fire. It is an awesome, inexorable body of marching Prussians who refuse to disintegrate. Then it is assault by bayonet. The enemy falls back, the villages are seized. The king lowers his spyglass. The battle is won, he states. But they didn't win the battle just yet. As the infantry captured Thomaswaldau, they began firing at the Austrian cavalry from the west, succumbing to the overwhelming numbers and chaos a disorderly rout followed. Charles's army remained, however. Approximately 20,000 Austrian infantry held the fields between Güntersdorf and Thomaswaldau. The Prussian infantry moved against them like a moving wall. The Austrians bitterly contested the ground, giving rise to a terrible fire, not lasting as long as Mollwitz, but being much noisier. They appeared unstoppable. The elite Bayreuth Dragoon Regiment filled the gaps as reserves among the Prussian infantry. They would prove crucial in Prussia's victory. It is unclear how their charge materialized, but not having seen any action, the Dragoons were looking for combat. At around 8:15 a.m., they received the order to charge against the Austrians. The Dragoons rushed between the Prussian gaps straight into the Austrian front line. They inflicted significant damage against the already battered Austrian lines. Within 20 minutes, they captured 2,500 prisoners, 67 colors, and 5 artillery pieces. When the smoke lifted, the troopers were seen to be hewing into a mass of...
You know when they say colors or flags or standards, I'd imagine they're not all equal, right? Like, I'm assuming some standards are more symbolic or important than some others, right?
Fleeing Austrians. The charge was the final nail in the Austrian coffin. By 9 a.m., the battle ended as Charles ordered the general retreat. Frederick did not commit to pursuing the Austrians despite the incredible success, allowing them to withdraw to Bohemia without harassment. All that remained was a field of ghastly carnage, thousands of dead and dying men and horses. Days later, it became clear the total number of casualties on the Austrian side was close to 13,800, of whom 5,000 prisoners and 3,120 dead. As for Austrian generals, 4 were killed, 4 captured, and 6 mortally wounded. The Prussians suffered 4,751 casualties at best. It was an incredible victory for Prussia.
Casualties, okay. Casualty doesn't mean death, because okay, for a second I'm like, wait, more were killed on the Prussian side, but never mind.
And Frederick personally. It was an incredible victory for Prussia and Frederick personally.
That was insane. That whole battle.
In the aftermath of the battle, Frederick sent letters to all European courts he could think of. He was happy to share his victory with the French King Louis XV and his old mentor, the Old Dessauer. He boasted of his victory, stating it was one of the most complete of all times, the likes of which is not seen since Blenheim. This referred to the major battle fought during the War of the Spanish Succession. He exclaimed his Bayreuth dragoons were excellent, and if this were Rome, they would have statues in their honor. In contrast, Charles was livid. A letter to Grand Duke Francis details his thoughts in the aftermath of the battle. The misfortune is all the more painful to me that our troops behaved like idiots. Forgive this expression, but I am furious. Frederick likely did not pursue the Austrians, convinced Maria Theresa would sue for peace after such a devastating defeat. This did not happen, however. The next few months, Charles received plenty of reinforcements from Italy and Bohemia. It appeared the war was far from over. Maria Theresa wrote letters to George II to assure him she was, in fact, not losing the war. But George got cold feet. On August 26, he concluded the Convention of Hanover with Frederick. Both parties guaranteed each other their territory. And, as was all too common during this war, both sides overlooked to inform their main allies, France and Vienna. Again, Frederick's allies were less than charmed with his conduct. But for now, Frederick enjoyed a brief respite. Finally, he could take a step back, somewhat relax, and count his chickens. However, he began counting before his chickens hatched. And in an ongoing war, that is never a good idea. Thank you very much for watching this video. If there's a topic, battle, or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also really like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you already gain early access to my videos. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.
Great video. That was one of the more just interesting battles I've seen in a long time on any of the history videos I've watched. It was kind of a shit show, but it for both sides. And then it got kind of worse for the Prussians, and then it got better. It was a great story. Like it was like that could be a perfect like movie battle right there. Really cool. Love learning love learning about this stuff with you guys. Can't wait to see your comments. Hope you learned something or can teach me something down there. And I'll see you guys next time, all right? Bye, guys.